So today I'd like to introduce you to the VLOOKUP function within Excel, which is considered by many, including myself, to be one of the most powerful functions that Excel has to offer. And unfortunately, it's one of the more intimidating functions that I think some folks who are new to Excel, or at least new to some of the more advanced functions, just aren't familiar with, and so they never use it. But it's unfortunate because it's very powerful. So let's go through an example, a very simple example that I think will help show you what VLOOKUP does, and also, quite frankly, how easy it is to use. So here we have a table, two columns. The first column has the date. This is chronological. And then for each date, we have a corresponding sales figure. Okay, so 1/1, $125, January 2nd, 66.67, so on and so forth. Okay, so we have all this data. Now let's say your boss comes up to you and says, I have these 10 dates and I need the corresponding sales figures for these dates, and I need it in the next 5 minutes. Well, this is obviously a very simplistic example. One could simply say, okay, so January 12th, you could go to your table. You could say, okay, here's 37.75. You could copy and paste it here and do it for all these dates. Okay, but let's say that first that this table had 50,000 rows of data, and let's also say that the selection of dates that he gave you had 10,000 rows of data. Okay, so there are 10,000 dates that you need sales numbers for. Well, that's probably not something you can do in 5 minutes, and certainly not in 10 minutes. But you could probably do it in less than 10 seconds, and I'm going to show you how to do that, and that's using the VLOOKUP function. So let's break down the VLOOKUP function components. VLOOKUP consists of 4 components. The first is the lookup value. Okay, and VLOOKUP value is basically the known, so it's what you have. Okay, and what you have in this case is the date. Okay, so since you know the date and you know the date exists in the table you have, that is your lookup value. The second is the table array. This is just the table or the sets of columns wherever your data exist. And in this case, it's columns A and B. Okay, that's our table in this particular case. It could be columns E through N or whatever the case is. Okay, but that's where the data exists. The next is the column index number. So this is basically where you're telling Excel which column, where does the data you need reside. Okay, so we have the date. In this particular case, whenever you highlight a table, the first column of your table is column 1, and then the second column, column 2, and so on and so forth. So we know we have what's in column 1, which is the date. What we need is the sales number, which is in column 2. Okay, so in this particular case, our column index number is column 2. Range lookup is is probably a little confusing for most folks. It's actually quite simple. You're basically telling that Excel, I need you to go out and find this exact value, or you can tell Excel, well, I want you to find the exact value, but if you can't, give me the best match, give me an approximate. So let's say that January 12th didn't exist in our table of data, but let's say January 9th did. So if Excel can't find January 12th, it will find the best closest match, and let's say that it goes to January 9th. So what it will do is, instead of returning data for you that perhaps would have been on January 12th, it's going to actually give you whatever's on January 9th, because that's the next closest match it could find. Okay, but in this particular instance, we know that all of these dates exist, so we're going to tell it to find an exact match. So let's go straight to it. The first thing you always do when you enter a function in Excel is you type in the equal sign. That's where you're telling Excel, I am going to enter a function. So let's type in VLOOKUP. You always type in, once you've typed in the name, you type open parentheses, and it will actually tell you what values it needs. So in this case, it's a lookup value. And recall, lookup value is the value you have. We have the date. Okay, so let's just click on the cell where the date resides. All right, and comma. Now we need table array. Remember, this is where the data exist. This is where we want Excel to go look for the data. So in this case, it's columns A and B. on the Table tab. So you can just simply, highlight the entire table, or really the easiest way is to simply start and just highlight the entire column. So we click on the A, you hold your left click button down, you drag it over, and so now you're telling it, okay, the table exists in columns A and B. All right, and you see table A and B. All right, comma, column index number. Now again, this is where you're going to say to Excel, I need the data in this column. Okay, so remember our table is A and B, so A is the first column, B is the second column. We know the date, so we don't want it to return the value in the date column because we already have that. We want the value in B, so in this case, it's the second column of our table. So 2, range lookup. So do we want an exact match, or do we want to tell Excel if you can't find an exact match, just go out and find the next best option? Okay, so we're going to type in false because we want it to find the exact match, and if it can't, we want it to give us an error code that basically says we can't find it. Okay, because we don't want a value if it's not going to be the exact date. If it's not the exact date, that's not what the boss asked for. He wanted for that date. Okay, so we're going to give that to him. Once you've typed in the function, you type enter, and there's your value. So 3775. So let's go and double check that. So January 12th in our table, 3775. Okay. Now there are a couple of ways that you can populate the rest of these rows with your function. The absolute easiest way to do this, and many folks are not aware of this, but what you can do is you can simply, you'll see there's a little box, bold colored box here at the bottom right hand corner of your cell. Okay, what you can do is we actually do two things. One is you can click on this, hold your left click button down, and drag it down as far as you want this formula to drag down with you or paste down with you. And we'll do that. Okay, but let's say again you have 10,000 rows. That's going to take a little bit longer than you want. So let's delete this. The absolute easiest way to do this is to simply, once you've hovered over this little box, double click. And so what you're telling Excel to do is I want you to paste this formula in every row down this column as long as the data exists in the corresponding row of any adjacent column. Now let me say that again. So for example, you notice it automatically stopped at row 11, and that's because it searched row 11 on this column and searched row 11 on this column and said, okay, so data exists at least on one of the columns, so I'm going to keep dragging that formula down. Okay, but then it went to row 12 and it said, okay, nothing exists here, nothing exists here, so I'm going to stop. So let me just show you. So let's say we type in some digits here. Now we're going to do it again, and notice it drags it all the way down. But notice, because we told it false, remember, range lookup false, it had to look for an exact match only. It couldn't find anything, so it gives you the error code that tells you, hey, we can't find this anywhere. All right, and so that's basically VLOOKUP in a nutshell. And there's one last thing I want to mention that's very important, and that is in your VLOOKUP, you tell Excel the table where the data lies. It's very important that in your table, the known value always resides in the first column of your table. It must reside in the first column because Excel is going to look for that known value in the first column. So whether it's here or whether it's D through J, it's always going to search this column first. So your known value has to reside in that column. Well, let's just say, for example, that the data is a little mixed up. Let's say that sales actually in your table is actually on the left, dates on the right. We need date on the right because remember, date on the left. Because if you highlight this table and we use the same formula here, it's going to search for the date in this first column. It's never going to find it. Easiest way to fix that, cut this row and paste it here. Now, here's your table. And so that's basically VLOOKUP in a nutshell. It's not a very difficult formula or function to use. It is very powerful. And so I hope you'll use it in your future endeavors. Thanks.